I had been 3 years on station Half-Light when I saw the only thing worth seeing. Half-Light was not a post anyone wanted. It hung in a slow, dead orbit around a moon that didn't have a name worth remembering, in a sector command had written off 2 wars ago as too quiet to matter and too far to abandon outright. They kept it staffed because regulations required it staffed, and they sent me because I had asked for somewhere nobody would need anything from me. I got my wish. For 3 years my job was to sit in a cracked acoustic chair, watch 6 screens that mostly showed nothing, and log what I saw into a record that, as far as I knew, no living person ever read. I want to be honest about what that does to a man. It doesn't make you stupid. It makes you patient in a way that has no name in normal life. You learn the difference between the static that means a dust cloud crossed an old relay and the static that means something is actually out there changing the numbers. You learn it the way you learn a person's face, not because anyone trained you to, but because you have nothing else to look at for 3 years running. So when the numbers changed, I knew before I understood. It was 3:40 station time when the far sensor, the one bolted to the outer ring, half-blind, mostly ornamental, picked up a return that didn't belong. Not a ship's signature. A gap. A patch of space that had been reading one way for 900 days and now, for 4 seconds, read another way and then corrected itself so cleanly that anyone less starved for data than I was would have called it sensor drift and gone back to sleep. I didn't go back to sleep. I pulled the log, ran it twice, and watched the Thren wing arrive 40 minutes later with the calm, unhurried confidence of people who had already decided what was in their sector. I knew the Thren by reputation only, a guild civilization, caste-built, every rank stitched into how they moved and who they were permitted to address directly. Their survey wings went ahead of their war fleets unarmed, by law older than their written language, because the guild's entire cosmology rested on the idea that nothing worth mapping could also be worth fearing. Send the warriors first, and you admit doubt. The Thren did not admit doubt. They sent cartographers, and the cartographers came home, and the war fleets came after with the maps already drawn and nothing left to discover. 4 ships, long, segmented hulls, instrument booms instead of guns, moving through the dead zone the way a man walks through a room he owns. I watched them on the cracked center screen, the one with the dead pixel cluster in the lower right that I'd stopped noticing 2 years ago, and I logged their heading, their spacing, their drive signatures, because that was the job, because it was always the job, because nobody had ever told me to stop doing the job even after nobody seemed to be checking it. They were headed for the gap, the 4-second anomaly. Whatever had blinked in and out of my sensor net at 3:40 was sitting directly in their flight path, and they were closing on it with the unbothered patience of an organization that had never once been wrong about what was safe to fly through. I watched it decloak at 110 kilometers. It did not announce itself. It did not power weapons, did not maneuver, did not do any of the things I had spent 3 years half expecting something to do if it ever showed up out here. It simply stopped being invisible, the gap in my sensor reading filling in all at once into a hull, low and dark and deliberately positioned, holding dead center in the Thren wing's transit corridor like it had been waiting there the entire 40 minutes, which I understood slowly it had. Its quiet verdict. I knew the silhouette from a recognition packet so old its watermark had faded. A stealth corvette class I'd been told in training no longer existed in active service. Small, unarmored by capital standards, a crew of perhaps 30. It did not retreat from 4 Thren survey ships closing on its position. It did not advance. It held. I have tried since to explain to people what that stillness looked like from where I sat, and I have never gotten it right, because the people I'm explaining it to weren't watching 4 unarmed survey vessels, built on a doctrine that assumed danger announces itself. Try to process a ship that was neither dangerous nor harmless, nor anything they had a slot for. The lead Thren vessel slowed. Then the second, I watched their formation, which had been clean and unhurried for 40 minutes, begin to fray at the edges, small correction burns here and there, the kind of motion that isn't maneuver, it's hesitation translated into thrust. Their sensor emissions spiked, then spiked again, a targeting class active scan that the quiet verdict did not respond to, did not power up to meet, did not retreat from. The corvette held its position in their path with its weapons dark and its hull motionless, and let 4 ships built around the assumption that nothing dangerous arrives quietly try to decide, in real time, what to do about something that had. I sat in my cracked chair on a station nobody remembered and understood, before the Thren did, what they were looking at. I understood it because I had 3 years of nothing to compare it to, 3 years of learning to read stillness as data, and what I read in that hour-long standoff was a ship that had not decloaked to fight and had not decloaked to flee. It had decloaked to be seen exactly once, perfectly positioned, and then to do absolutely nothing else, because nothing else was the message. The Thren wing reversed course at the 11-minute mark. Not fled, I want to be precise, because precision was the only discipline I had left by then. They came about in formation, deliberate, unhurried, the same calm they'd arrived with, and that calm told me more than panic would have. Panic is what a doctrine does when it's been violated and still believes in itself. This was a doctrine quietly admitting it had no entry for what it had just seen, and choosing, with great dignity, to go home and rewrite itself rather than test a theory that even an unarmed cartography guild's deepest instincts told it not to test. The quiet verdict held position for 6 more minutes after the Thren wing's drive trails faded past my sensor range. Then it cloaked again, and the gap in my readings closed, and station half-light went back to being a dead post around a moon nobody named, with one man in a cracked chair and a log file that, for the first time in 3 years, mattered. I sent it anyway. That was always the job: log what you see, transmit on schedule, whether or not anyone on the other end was listening. I had stopped expecting an answer somewhere around year 2. I sent the Thren wings full approach, the anomaly, the decloak, the standoff, the withdrawal. Every number my half-blind outer sensor had managed to scrape together, and I went back to the log, because that was what a watch officer did with what he'd watched. Command answered 9 days later. 9 days for a transmission that should have taken 11 minutes one way, which told me, more than the message itself, how far my data had traveled up a chain that I had genuinely believed didn't know my chair existed. They wanted confirmation of headings. They wanted the corvette's transponder code, which I didn't have, because the quiet verdict had never broadcast one. Its crew had let a sensor net they couldn't have known was watching draw its own conclusions, the same way it had let the Thren draw theirs. They wanted to know if I'd logged it in real time or reconstructed it after. In real time, I told them. I watch everything in real time, that's the post. There was a pause in the reply that I choose to believe was respect, though I have no real evidence for that beyond 3 years of wanting it to be. I am still on half-light. I expect I will be for a while yet. Someone has to keep watching a sector that just proved it isn't as dead as the map said, and I am, technically, already qualified. But I think about that hour more than I think about almost anything else from those years. 4 ships built on the certainty that nothing worth finding hides quietly, meeting one ship that did nothing but exist exactly where it had chosen to exist, and a doctrine 4 centuries old deciding, without a shot fired, that some things are better left unmapped. I didn't do anything that day. I want to be honest about that too. I sat in a chair and watched and wrote down what I saw, the same as every day before it and every day since. But I have come to think that's a kind of doing in the end, that someone has to be the one still looking when the thing finally happens, or it never happened at all, not in any way that counts. 3 years of nothing taught me how to see the one thing that mattered. I have decided that was worth the 3 years.